on this episode of Spirit Talk.
I think what it is that serial killers are the ultimate rule breakers. They are not constrained to the rules that you and I and decent people live our lives by. We would not dream, or at least not seriously dream, of killing somebody, of torturing somebody. They are the ultimate renegades, the ultimate rebels. That they stick their finger up to society and go their own way. And I think some people find that very attractive, but it's an attractive fantasy. You wouldn't actually want to live with one, right? Nobody would actually want to be socially involved with one.
Hi, I'm Chris Fleming, the creator of Spirit Talk. You're listening to the podcast where I'll be bringing you the greatest thinkers, researchers, and contributors from around the world to discuss what we know in the field of the paranormal, life after death, and the pursuit of higher consciousness. Hello, my fellow listeners. This is Spirit Talk, and I am Chris Fleming. I want to thank you guys for joining for this month. I know I'm a little bit behind on it. I've got a lot of things going on and trying to organize more than I could even talk about. I guess the big thing is taking care of my mom. My mom was in the hospital for almost 3 months. She had fallen and she had broken her knee. And this is on addition of her over a year ago breaking her and shattering her hip and having hip surgery. And then previously before that, cracking her tailbone. A couple years before that, shattering and breaking her shoulder and her arm and having it replaced with metal bars. And then prior to that, she had skin cancer. And prior to that, she had 4 blood clots and was emergency in surgery. My mom has gone through so much in the last 5-6 years, as well as losing her husband in October, my stepdad, Ray, due to COVID. So with all that in mind, I've been working on my mom's house and getting people in there to fix things and get it ready for the market. Because there's no way my mom can continue to stay there. I mean, she's confined to a wheelchair, and she's all alone. So we're trying to make arrangements for my mom. She may stay with me for a little while before we find her a place. She may go into a care center where she can have her cats, or she might go live with my sister. Don't know yet. But I've been spending a lot of time on her house, getting it prepared for sale, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So that's been taking up a lot of time. But I am cherishing this time where I am getting to spend those moments with my mom. I talk to her every single day, call her on the phone, see how she's doing. I go over there a couple times a week, and on Wednesdays I spend the night there just because she needs somebody around. And plus, I'm her son, and there's going to be a day where she's no longer around. And you want to make the best of it that you can. So I'm just telling you there's a delay in getting this podcast out, and everything else in my life has kind of been pushed to the side till we get this all caught up and resolved. But for those of you that have been a long-time listener, you may remember that this was a similar situation that I went through with my father. Even though he was semi-paralyzed and in a care center for about 4 to 5 years, I would go there and visit him frequently. But what I'm trying to stress by bringing this up, obviously this is a personal issue, and I tend to occasionally share these personal things that I'm going through or I have gone through in my life with my listeners. It's because I care about you, and I know that you guys all care as well. And I want to thank you for that. But this was something that obviously I went through with my father as well. And I shared with the world by filming these things and putting them on YouTube, so my father could still connect with his fans, but then also inspiring people, whoever watched or listened, that you don't forget about your parents. You don't forget about the elderly, your grandparents. You do what you can to spend time with them and let them know that you love them, because there's going to be a time that they're gone. And I know for some it may be difficult because you may not have had a strong or a healthy relationship with your parents. But there's always that opportunity for forgiveness. There's always that opportunity to be the better person, that to be the light. And even though someone may have done something terrible, and honestly, I don't want to go into that because I know it can really pull some emotional strings. But there's an opportunity sometimes where we can stress what's important. And what's important is that the soul needs to be healed. And if you give that olive branch and they don't want it, well, then they don't want it. But there's always that chance to do that. So I consider this, because I know my mom and I have had some battles here and there at times, not as much as my dad, but my mom's gone through a lot and went through a lot with her parents. So I try to be the better person. But because you love somebody, or you want that love from a parent, there's going to be a time in your life where you have that opportunity to give it. And sometimes it's better to give than receive, because in the act of doing that, you can heal, but you can also heal them, because you teach them what love is. So I hope bringing this up, you guys learn something from this, and you're able to do that with your parents or your grandparents as time goes on. So I do want to thank you guys for tuning in and being patient with me and getting this podcast out. Just a quick, little plugs that I want to say is, for TV, obviously, that I didn't go film Help My House is Haunted season 3, which was difficult to not be able to do that, because, my whole purpose has been to try to help spirits and help people in what they're dealing with, and using a TV show as a vehicle to get me out there in places that I would never know of, or I would not be able to afford to go to, is, there's been that little vacancy in my life the past 6 months because of not being able to do that. Hopefully I'll be able to come back for another season. But in the meantime, I was very fortunate to be asked to be a couple different appearances. And I just want to share that with you. Is if you have Discovery Plus, I made an appearance on Fright Club with Jack Osborne and the Ghost Brothers, the episode called Misty Business. I went on there and discussed a really compelling and very interesting video of an apparition of a mist that flows through the house. It was great to see something like this, what night vision had captured. And I analyzed it, and I discussed some very important factors with Jack and with the Ghost Brothers. So if you are able to access this series, Fright Club, check out the episode Misty Business. The other thing coming up on Portals to Hell with Jack Osborne and Katrina Weidman. Katrina reached out to me, asked if I wanted to be on the show. And I had met Katrina back in 2006, I think it was 2006, 2007, at the university, at Penn State University. They had the UNIVCon, which is a paranormal convention, which was a lot of fun back then. And I got to know her from there, so I've been wanting to work with her. So I went on the show, Portals to Hell, an episode that's going to air April 24th. And it was fantastic, because I wanted to investigate with Jack, and I wanted to investigate with Katrina, and I got that opportunity. The universe delivered, and I can't wait to see how it went. I do know during my walkthrough, I felt like I was all over the place, because there were so many different things I was picking up. Crazy stuff from left field, right field. I'm like, guys, I'm just going to tell you all the stuff I'm getting. And to my surprise, when I was done, they told me the stuff that I was getting, and some stuff was even surprising to myself. So it was a lot of fun. And the one thing I got to admire about them, and I'll tell you this, is that they were mum. When I would say something, I get something, I look at them, and their faces were stone cold. They didn't say a word. They didn't tell me anything. And, and they even apologized. He says, we know you looked at us a couple times, like, because you were thinking, oh my God, am I even right? What's going on with what I'm saying? But that is what they do. And I respect that organic investigating, as well as keeping me in suspense until they revealed to me what I picked up. So check out Portals to Hell episode that is released on April 24th. It's going to be exciting. In the meantime, I know I have a podcast. A lot of people have podcasts. They try to sell you stuff and this and that. And, the only thing I can tell you guys, if you're interested, that I do is spiritual consultations. And it wouldn't be right for me to go through my whole life, having studied psychology, having worked with people, top individuals in parapsychology, and even some of the engineers and scientists, as well as having this vast amount of experiences my entire life, not to be there as someone to go to and discuss what you're dealing with. And I've been doing this now for going on 15 years. So for 15 years, I have been doing spiritual consultations and readings. Now, I did readings years ago when I was, high school, college, stuff like that, here and there, but not set up professionally. And that's something that I take pride in. Now, I don't have a wide open schedule to where I do that. I usually allow on Mondays and Tuesdays, and sometimes on Thursdays, the opportunity to book a one-on-one session with me, whether it's over the phone or whether it's face-to-face. If you Google or use any search engine and just type in Chris Fleming, that's 1M, Fleming, and Genbook, Genbook, that is the website that hosts my scheduling page and all the services that I offer. So if you're looking for a 45-minute reading, if you're looking to get some spirit art for me to see your soul and spirit on the other side with your guides and loved ones, I do a watercolor painting of that. If you just have questions, or you're dealing with a haunting, or you have psychic abilities, or you're trying to figure out a paranormal experience, or where you're at in your life, you can either book a question and answer session, a spiritual consultation with your spirit guides, or you can even just do a 45-minute reading. It's up to you. Whatever you can afford, and it's very affordable. I don't jack my prices up because I've been on TV and this and that. I try to make it accessible to everybody. So if you're interested, check out Genbook. Go there and book a session. Now, we need to get to my guest. And I understand this topic that we're going to be discussing on serial killers may be a little sensitive to some, and I understand that. Because Spirit Talk normally talks about consciousness, contributions to the field, and various paranormal subjects. Why are we going into serial killers? Well, obviously my guest, Richard Estep, who's an author, also a paranormal investigator, someone I got to know. He's written a lot of books, like over 20 books. And this particular book crossed my path on social media last week. And when I saw this, I'm like, oh, wow, Richard wrote a book on serial killers. Here's something that we have not talked about on Spirit Talk. So I need to get him on and just have a conversation about that topic. And that's what this is. If it's a little too sensitive for you and you don't want to go into that dark realm, because it is a dark realm of what humans are capable of doing, then feel free to just pop back next month. But I'm sure most of you will enjoy the conversations and even the tangents we go off on this particular interview. Please note that you'll notice a few times that my speech is slurring, and that's due to neuro and brain fatigue. That, on occasion, I suffer from because of my car accident back in 2009. This interview was recorded late at night after I had done another interview for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. So I had reached my limit, but nothing less, I gave my full energy to my guest. And it just goes to show you, when we have challenges in life, it's best, I'm not making an excuse, I'm just sharing with you the truth. And that's all we can do. Make the best of our circumstances and just do the best job we can. We'll be right back after this quick music break. I have with me a writer, Richard Estep. Is that how you say your name? Estep?
Yeah, it is. Well done, Chris. Most Americans say E-step for some reason, but Estep it is.
Well, there's no space in between the E and step.
This is true.
Well, Richard is a paranormal author. He's written so many books. We're going to talk about a couple of them. But he's also a paranormal investigator. He calls himself a D-list TV personality. You've seen him, though, on Haunted Case Files. It's called Paranormal Investigators in the UK. Haunted Hospitals, and Paranormal 911. Now, he helped start and forge Boulder County Paranormal Research Society in 2006, which is still going strong. And he's had a great love and passion for ghosts his entire life, going back to a young age. We're going to talk more about his history, but we're also going to talk about his latest books that he's put out, and one of them in particular that I noticed that popped up on social media about serial killers. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming. And Richard, I got to ask you, serial killers? What made you write a book about serial killers?
Well, over the course of my 25 years investigating, I was involved with a number of serial killer-related hauntings. There was the case of John Wayne Gacy haunting a movie theater in Auburn, Illinois, and I got to write a book about that, Gacy's Ghost. And I wrote about the haunting of Fox Hollow Farm, which is the serial killer Herb Baumeister, the I-80 Strangler. Very dark case, but a fascinating one. And finally, the Villisca Axe Murder House, which is one of the great unsolved crimes, but many believe the perpetrator was a serial killer also. So I started to get into some of these cases and found the mindset of those involved fascinating. And finally, my publisher said, "Would you like to do a book, no ghosts, just straight on serial killers?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll do that. I'll take a deep dive into the world of serial killers." And 150,000 words later, a year of research, and a desire to have some mental floss, there was the book.
Right. You know, what's interesting to me about this is, I'll state real quickly, is I remember when I was in high school, grade school and then high school, we had the John Wayne Gacy that occurred here in Illinois. And ironically, my father's office was in an attorney's office, and the attorney, Terry Sullivan, was the state attorney of Illinois that prosecuted Gacy.
And wrote a great book of his own, as I recall.
Yes, he did. And I was in his office sitting in the conference room while my dad was in a room with Terry, because my dad was going to possibly do a light beer commercial, because my dad was a professional athlete, and Terry was just kind of helping him through it, and so was somebody else. There was this binder that was on the table. And I'm sitting there, curiosity, you got nothing to do in the room. We didn't have phones back then to go through. I see this binder, so I pull it towards me and I start flipping through it. It was 8x10s of all the evidence of the Gacy case.
Oh, boy.
It was the tools and the toys. It was them digging up the bodies from the crawl space. So I'm seeing these dead bodies, these parts of bodies. I'm seeing the decay, and I'm seeing all this horrific stuff. One of the people in the office walks by and sees this, races in there, and this book isn't supposed to be in here, and takes it away. My mind was stained at a young age to see the body decompose when they bring it out of the water in the crawl space, and it hits the oxygen and oxygenates, and it just changes. But to see these photographs, I'm like, oh my God, this looks like some of the horror movies that you see, Yeah. So for me, it was kind of like terrifying to see these types of images. For you to sit there and write and research and see the reports. Now, what people may not know is you're a paramedic as well. How long have you been a paramedic?
Yeah, I was an EMT in 2001. I became a paramedic in 2009. So getting on for 20 years.
20 years. So you've seen some fatalities and you've seen some horrific accidents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then to go to the mindset of killers that have killed people that God only knows how they've been influenced to do so. Have you seen any type of psychological pattern with this, or something that kind of is consistent with these serial killers?
So one thing that's always fascinated me is the great debate. It's as old as humanity itself. Is this nature or nurture, right, Chris? Are some people simply born bad? Is their wiring wrong from birth? Or do things change in their environment? Are they molded in a certain way? And I'd love to know what you think, but I've come to the conclusion that it's kind of a mix. I think that there are many people out there who have the potential to murder, but never quite let themselves get pushed over that line. And then there are those that do so, get away with it, and then realize that they quite like it. They find it fulfilling. And when they're not arrested, assuming that they're not, that they continue in this pattern. But there are commonalities, Chris. I mean, one thing that I found, overwhelmingly serial killers are male, though there are exceptions. Many of them are mama's boys. They were put on a pedestal at childhood. So we see this with some of the men like Dr. Harold Shipman, who is believed to be the most prolific serial killer ever, killed hundreds with morphine and similar drugs as a physician in this very trusted position. Mama's boy, and got into medicine because the doctor that gave his mom medicine, pain relief, he wanted to be like him. He found that to be a kind of admirable role model, and then I think developed a power complex. So mama's boys. And the other thing that's physical, I found in many cases, quite a few of them sustained serious head injuries. Like Fred West of the Cromwell Street House of Horrors, Nanny Doss, the giggling granny, the American female serial killer. There's a record of them sustaining head trauma at certain points in their lives, usually formative years. So you see things like that. And then there are the ones we all know, like a tendency to wet the bed until quite an advanced age, to torture animals, inflict harm on animals, those kind of things. The signs are often there.
See, that's just horrifying. But the thing that you mentioned about the brain head trauma is, I'm familiar with a little bit with CTE, chromatic traumatic encephalopathy, which is the deterioration of parts of the brain caused by concussions and trauma to the brain. Because my father, who was a professional hockey player 13 years, he died of CTE. And his brain was the first brain of a hockey player that was donated to the Boston University, the Sports Legacy Institute, where they studied this, and it's what's known worldwide. And they found just a lot of CTE where the brain was damaged. And my father obviously he was a violent hockey player fighting, but later he used to have manic depressive outbursts. Mm-hmm. He used to still get in fights, and he would go into these rages, with when he was in his car, or if he was at the racetrack, he would get in fights, mood swings, major mood swings. Even at my baseball games, I quit baseball because my dad would get so mad and go after the umpires and stuff that I said, I just can't do this. What's my point? My point is that this computer system we have in our heads, if it's not working properly, it can cause this violence, right?
Well, and to put this into your immediate ballpark again, as I'm sure you know, as a paranormal investigator, there's a correlation between people that sustain serious head trauma and psychic awakenings or developing extrasensory abilities that weren't there before, correct?
Correct.
So again, we're talking, I don't know whether it involves the computer or the operating system, because we're not entirely sure which is which in the brain, right? The mix. But in both cases, you have some kind of insult to this very sensitive and complex organ, and you have a radical change, usually one that lasts lifelong.
That's a great point. Do you believe, and this question's coming, do you believe at all through your research, or maybe in your own experiences, that there can be outside influences, such as negative energies, spirits, demons, whatever you want to call it, that can get into someone's consciousness or persuade someone to act out these things, these violent acts?
This is a really tricky question to ask a medical professional. And it's a very worthwhile question as well. Because when I do haunted hospitals and also on Paranormal 911, we get a number of cases on those shows where nurses, paramedics, police officers, doctors will talk about patients that appear, they'll look at their behavior, they'll look at their face, and it will almost appear as if somebody else is looking out from behind their eyes, as if it's not entirely human or it's not the person that they seem to be. Does that make sense? And also we're familiar with cases in which drugs like ketamine are abused. Ketamine is well known for abusers experiencing alien encounters, and they believe that they go to some kind of other plane and stuff like that.
Look at Flocka.
And I've always wondered how much of this is the effect of the medication on the brain and how much of it might be genuine. Right. Now, it's the kiss of death to any medical provider's career to tell you that they start believing in negative entities, in human entities, ghost spirits and demons. I've done it for 25 years and I still have a job, so I feel very fortunate. And I'll just say that I'm definitely open to that possibility. It would never be part of my clinical diagnosis, of course. It's something that a true mental health professional, as opposed to a generalist like a paramedic, would have to talk about in more detail. But I'm certainly open to the possibility. And I will say that a number of cases I've worked on where patients did suffer from things like depression, it was really, really strong, seemed to make them vulnerable to some kind of outside influence. That as a paranormal investigator, they'll tell me, I do have depression. I didn't take my medications. And I started feeling as though I wasn't in control of my choices and that I was being influenced, almost like there was an invisible, to use the phrase, monkey on my back, So I'm open to the possibility, Chris. I think the wisest people in the paranormal always say, I don't know, but I will keep investigating.
Yeah, I've seen certain interviews, like you look at Jeffrey Dahmer, interview with Gacy, a couple other ones, I can't remember their names at the moment. But what always caught me was they would start talking about the voices, hearing these voices in their head, and that sometimes they would listen to them, sometimes they wouldn't. And usually when they'd listen to them, they would either do something really bad to the animal or they would go out and go on this spree. So for me, it's always been like, well, where's that voice coming from? We have psychological disorders that we know, the mind has split personalities or whatever goes on, manic depression, bipolar. But I've always just wondered, there's ever going to be a day where we can validate if there is some type of outside influence that is taking hold of somebody to carry that out, and they're not using their free will as they should to say, hey, I'm not going to listen to that,
Well, I think we all hear voices. I mean, we all converse with ourselves, don't we? We all have conversations with ourselves many times a day, and we don't think anything of it. If you learn to meditate, as I'm sure you do, I mean, my wife is a Buddhist, so she knows more about this than I do, but I've always been told that people that are extremely good at meditating, they observe thoughts that pass by. And if those thoughts are the conversations you're talking about, then who or what is the observer? What truly is us, and what is the observed and what are we observing? But you raise some excellent points. I've run in two cases that fascinate me in this arena. One is in Iowa, Malvern Manor, a former rest home, a care home, a nursing facility. And one of the hauntings there is a room called Gracie's room. And Gracie was a person with multiple personality disorder. And nurses documented double digits, 13, 14 distinct personalities in Gracie. She used to sit there at night in her room, and new staff members would say, "Who's the guy in Gracie's room?" Because she's a sweet old lady, and they'd hear this baritone male voice. And chillingly, the voice used to love to repeat the phrase, "The devil's coming to get me," over and over again. Now, I bring this up because we don't know what happened to Gracie after she left Malvern Manor, whether she passed away or moved to another facility when it closed down. But there is evidence that multiple of her personalities are active in her room, thanks to EVPs and ITC sessions. So if you have a physical pathology when you are alive, and multiple personality disorder is a great example, when you pass on, I mean, you're the expert here, Chris, but are we instantly healed of those? I was discussing this tonight with a fellow investigator who said she'd heard of a deaf spirit. And do we retain those physical ailments when we pass on? Because the machinery is broken, right? Deafness is caused by a fault with the organic machinery. Mm-hmm. The spirit is independent of that, one would assume. So do we carry those ailments on?
It's a very good question. Some people get trapped here, some don't. Mm-hmm. Some do end up go towards peace. That torment is over. Because some individuals may have a psychological or physical ailment. You think about someone that has Down syndrome, someone that's autistic, and their brain or body is not functioning properly. Well, there's still a spirit and soul. Mm-hmm. It's just that their vehicle or their car has a flat tire, or the engine isn't functioning properly. They may not have the right speeds to drive. Our bodies are a vehicle. And the soul that fulfills that body when it goes to the other side is complete. You talk about people that have had near-death experiences and come back, where their father was bald when he was older, but here on the other side, he had a full set of hair. Instead of looking at 60, 70 years old, he's now 30 years old. Someone that had lost a leg in war, they're fully complete on the other side. Because the physical body you don't take with you. The spiritual body you do. Now, if you choose not to have a leg up there and you don't want to, then your leg will disappear. But because you're a form of energy that's based on consciousness, and all things such as the mustard seed happen instantaneously with faith, you have a complete body. But the thing is that there are people that are tormented. And if that anguish, which can happen, is they leave that physical body and they still have that mental depressive state, they could maintain that anguish and go into their own little dimension of hell or their own little dimension of solitude. And that's where, you got to work with those people to pray or do whatever you can to get them released. But we can go off on another tangent in that. Sure. I want to come back into the serial killers. What fascinates me is not obviously what they do. But there are people all over the world that, unfortunately, they are attracted to that. Like, yes. Wow, this is interesting. This person killed all these people. I'm fascinated. Some of these killers get letters. Women want to marry them. It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. I just don't get it. Is it just the sense of power or the limelight that people are attracted to?
I did write a book also about the Hotel Cecil in Los Angeles, and Richard Ramirez had a room there, and that kind of ties in with serial killers. I wrote about Ramirez in this book also, in the serial killers book. Ramirez was by no means a handsome man. If you've ever seen pictures of him, he has this kind of sallow, saturnine look with lanky hair. He looks like the kind of guy you would cross the street to avoid.
Right. And he never bathed. He never bathed.
He didn't. And you look at his trial, and he had this circle of female fans that would come in, like the Beatles. He got the same treatment that John, Paul, George, and Ringo did. It was crazy. And my opinion, it's just an opinion, is that, you can understand how some people like Ted Bundy, who are charming and charismatic in certain ways, might have fans. But I think what it is that serial killers are the ultimate rule breakers. They are not constrained to the rules that you and I and decent people live our lives by. We would not dream, or at least not seriously dream, of killing somebody, of torturing somebody. They are the ultimate renegades, the ultimate rebels that they stick their finger up to society and go their own way. And I think some people find that very attractive, but it's an attractive fantasy. You wouldn't actually want to live with one, right? Nobody
Correct.
would actually want to be socially involved with one. So I think that's what it is. It's seeing them as the ultimate rule breakers that don't live under the same strictures that you and I and the rest of society does.
Right. It's a terrifying predicament for anybody. And we hear stories all the time of people that are put into certain situations where someone that's a killer, or they're locked in their house and they're kept there for a long period of time. And then people that have survived, the one kid that survived from, Jeffrey Dahmer, and you hear other victims that somehow they got out. They didn't become another number. It could be anybody, and that's the scary thing. But there's always that curiosity of why, I mean, you ask the question, what makes an ordinary person stalk, torture, and murder their fellow human beings? I mean, you touched briefly on that at the beginning, but can you expand upon that?
Yeah, and I think, Chris, there's an ability they have to depersonalize others. They don't see their victims as being human. They see them as being a commodity. If I go to my fridge right now and I pull out a bottle of Blue Moon, my favorite beer, at least on this side of the pond, and I consume it and throw it away, to me, that's an object, right? It's a bottle of beer. It has a very specific effect. It brings me a little bit of joy, and I don't give it a second thought. Serial killers see other humans in that way sometimes. They mean no more to them than something in your fridge. And that's a horrible, horrible thought. But if you think about it, that ability to do these kind of things, to depersonalize people, can sometimes be beneficial if you use it for good. Look at a surgeon. A surgeon has to be confident. A surgeon has to be willing to open somebody up at great risk to them, at great risk to themselves in terms of their career and livelihood. They operate on the brain, the heart, you name it. If they hesitate, if they think, oh my goodness, I've got a scalpel and I'm cutting into this person who's somebody's mom, somebody's grandma, oh God, this could be terrible. Right. Then they couldn't do their job, Right. We see the same with the good, I should say, and bad government leaders. The ability to wage war, to be a skilled soldier. Again, you have to depersonalize. If you truly thought about the fact that you were putting bullets into a human being's body, if you really empathize with that, you could not do your duty. So it can have a positive a slant to it when used for good. But serial killers depersonalize, and they use it for their own selfish and evil ends.
Do we know, has there been studies to try to figure out why they become that way or how they become that way? Where they're desensitized and depersonalized from another human being?
There have been, and there have even been physical studies of their brains looking for structural abnormalities and things of that nature. There are theories that one day in the not too distant future, and this raises a whole ethical conundrum, Chris, we might be able to test for genetic markers that predispose somebody to those kind of character traits, which, would you want to know if your baby son had...
like baby Hitler. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, you can't prejudge somebody based on that, right? You can't. What action could you take? So it's kind of interesting.
Like they've said, if you could go back in time into little baby Hitler's crib and you had to kill him, would you do it to save those millions of people? I mean, that would be such a hard thing to do because it's just a baby,
Well, morally and ethically, yeah. I mean, if you're going to apply, though, a more, I would say no for an entirely different reason. Again,
right.
Nobody wants to kill a baby, but heaven forbid, then we might have had somebody competent running the Axis powers in the Second World War.
Yeah.
If the plot to kill Hitler had succeeded, von Stauffenberg's plot, and somebody like Rommel had taken over instead, the war could have gone on for many more years, and we could have lost many more millions of lives. Point being that you can't make those decisions and expect the outcome to necessarily be good. We can't play golf.
No, you're right. You're right. Because then what else are you changing? Could be far worse.
The butterfly.
I mean, it's like you have an election. There could have been elections to where one person won, the other one didn't. But if that other person did, we could have gone to a war. You don't know.
Yeah.
A world war. You don't know. That's the scary thing. But that's the scary thing that's about these serial killers. Like you said earlier, are they born or are they made? Is it their upbringing? Are they raised that way? What is it that actually sets them off to do this?
And we also talk about, in the book, I talk about spree killers as well.
Yes.
Which is kind of a similar but different animal, right? A spree killer is someone who goes, of course, on a killing spree and is then stopped. So I look at Charles Whitman, who shot so many unfortunate innocents from the UT Austin Tower, I look at the Aurora movie theater shooting, which I had some tangential involvement with as a paramedic, and cases like that. And you look at what does set, mass shootings we know are an epidemic in our nation right now. What are the triggers, and can we spot this early, and can we stop this from happening? So we should figure this out pretty soon.
We have to. But when you look at the state of the United States and even in other countries, there's just not enough resources to help people with mental health issues. And I think we need to improve upon that all over the world.
No, you're right.
More counselors and better programs.
I think that's absolutely true. Mental health is a huge issue throughout the Western world. I believe the entire world. And looking at the connected digital globe as we see it now, I was a kid that was bullied, and it has given me a lifelong hatred for bullies that I will probably never get over. But when you're bullied at school, at least you can go home. And I think one of the reasons I'm a writer and have such a love of books is that I used to escape into books, into Tolkien and stuff like that, these fantasy worlds. And I was at least safe until the next day. And I was in a literary world where the good guys won. Well, now all of us have we doom scroll, right? That's the thing. We have bad news waved in our face 24/7. That's the news cycle. So I think that because of the nature of communication, it has driven us apart rather than bring us together in many ways.
I agree with that. It's funny you talk about J.R. Tolkien. Mine was Conan the Barbarian, Savage Sword of Conan.
Big Howard fan myself too.
Yeah, Robert E. Howard. Yep.
Those Frank Frazetta covers.
Yeah.
Those pencils by Gil Kane. I mean, I was a huge Conan fan too.
Yeah, Buscema, Ernie Chan. I got an original Ernie Chan hanging on my wall.
No
right
way.
Now. Yeah, watercolor he did for me. But,
Barry Wynne Smith.
Yes.
All that good stuff.
All that stuff.
Yeah, I could talk Conan all night, but I'm sure we're going to bore your listeners.
No, I know. The adventures, the monsters, the women, everything, the magicians.
James Bond with a sword.
That's right. There you go. James Bond with the sword. Well,
to keep it on track, the good guy won, right? Conan was violent, but he brought justice. He brought fairness. Correct.
The
bad guys never won when Marion came into town.
Right. But now we got serial killers. We got like Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer. I mean, have they ever found out who the identities of Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer were?
No. One of the most terrifying things about Zodiac was until not all that long ago, he was sitting in a retirement home, possibly. It fascinates me as to why serial killers stop. Because generally they're compelled to do so. There are a few rare cases in which they may go a decade without killing, or even slightly longer. But generally, once they kill and get away with it and develop this compulsion to do it, they will continue to kill until they are either caught, which means they are either unlucky or they get complacent, and it's usually the latter, or they are incarcerated for some other crime, because, these are also members of society that will engage in other crimes, larceny, and so forth. Or they die of natural causes and they just die off. So Jack the Ripper finished his murders and just disappeared. There were some copycat killings, which initially was believed to be the Ripper. Now police don't think that was necessarily the case. And the truth is we will never know. And that's what adds to their mystique, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are thousands of books written on Jack the Ripper. When I investigated the Villisca Axe murders, not just the location, but the murders, that is such a big story. My cat's opening drawers. That is such
sound like an axe coming down there.
That was my cat, the Stig, opening drawers. Chris. The Villisca Axe murders actually was the story that wiped the Titanic off the front page of American newspapers.
Wow!
For months beforehand, everything was Titanic, 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 and then Villisca wiped that off the front page. And partly it's because to this day nobody knows who walked into that house, took an axe, and killed 6 kids and 2 adults in their beds.
Wow.
You know, but there was this rash of axe murders occurring all across the Midwest
Lizzie Borden.
at the time.
Yeah.
Well, no, but what I mean is there was a rash of what looks like connected axe murders. The same guy, and probably the best theory on this. There's an excellent book called The Man from the Train, which cites that there was essentially a hobo that was riding the rails, and he would get off at these various railroad towns. And all of these murders, which went on for over a decade, occurred within half a mile of a railroad stop. And he would always use the axe of the people that lived in the house. He never brought his own, always entered through the ground floor late at night, around midnight, always covered any reflective surface inside the house, like a mirror. But while he committed the murders, always assaulted one of the female members after committing the murders, like all these commonalities. And the police did not share information as they do now. So nobody figured at the time that this was one chain of serial killings. A couple of families were killed by this guy in Colorado Springs, not too far from me. Wow. So, it's fascinating, right? And the unsolved crimes fascinate all of us.
Right.
Something horrific about being killed in your bed. When you go to bed at night, you lock up your house. You know how it is. You put out the lights, and you're in your inner sanctum. You should be at your safest in bed, in your own home, in your own bed, right? That's where you should be at your most comfortable, your most reassured. The thought that a complete stranger could walk into your house with an axe, kill you and everybody else in your family is just gut-wrenching. It's awful.
That's what it was, like the fear that gripped Los Angeles with the Night Stalker.
Yeah, Richard Ramirez, absolutely.
Yeah. Did you see that documentary on Netflix?
About him? I did. So much on Netflix is serial killers at the moment, isn't it? I did see that, and I thought it was very well done, if ever so slightly too long.
I wish they would have played more of the audio. I know the rights were held to the original guy who did the interview, but the actual audio recordings of Richard Ramirez, because I remember years ago reading the transcript of some of the things he said when he was interviewed. Now, they only used some bits and pieces near the end of his actual voice during that interview when he was questioned, but I remember reading more of it. And the one thing they didn't touch on was, obviously, he was in the satanic cult.
He was,
and he worshipped the devil. But in the interview, he talked more about the devil, what the devil was like, and why he had this relationship with the devil, which was not in the Netflix documentary, which I really wanted to hear. And I'll never forget him saying, "You don't know the devil." And that he would sometimes feel he had this superhuman strength where he punched a stop sign and the stop sign spun around. And he felt that the more he was doing these killings and this and that, he was gaining more and more power because he was doing this for the devil, because allegedly, from what he says and other people, that they feed off the fear and the panic and the terror and the violence. And that was part of his thing.
And he was convinced that Satan would protect him. He said this several times, which absolutely seemed to have worked until it didn't. He was caught by a mob of people in LA, and turns out the LAPD are the ones that saved him from getting beaten to a pulp and strung up. Right. So, Ramirez was interesting, and you never really know how much of what any of them say to take at face value. That's the problem.
Right.
We've heard that classic legal defense, the devil made me do it, right? It's it's almost as old as time itself. The voice is the devil. I do wonder if Richard Ramirez truly did believe that, and I personally think he did. I think he had convinced himself. Now, he was also influenced, though, by a family member who had fought in Vietnam and had shown him a number of very gruesome photographs of things he had done to villagers and females out in Vietnam. So his environment was not a good one. His role models were absolutely terrible as well. You kind of had this perfect storm as he was growing up. You do have to wonder, if you'd taken the same kid and you'd given him a relatively normal upbringing, would those tendencies have still surfaced? Would they not? Would they, that fascinates me. And I don't have a solid answer on it.
I remember studying when I was taking abnormal psychology in college. We talked a little bit about this, serial killers and putting them in the right upbringing. And obviously at that time, that tended to be the big thing. They didn't have the best childhood, this and that, and they were given the right things. They wouldn't end up this way. But there's also the psychological issues, the way people gauge and deal with stuff. So, I mean, for you, what was probably the most horrific thing that you experienced in researching this, that you found from the research and the history?
Well, for me, it was the personal connection at some of the locations. I mean, I went to Fox Hollow Farm in Indiana, where Herbert Baumeister killed his victims. Most serial killer murder scenes are destroyed, so they don't become a shrine, don't attract the ghoulish to come celebrate those terrible acts. Fox Hollow, though, is a private residence. It is owned by a family, and I'm actually really glad about that, because all the negative energy that place saw during the killings, I like the fact that a decent family is now turning that negative into a positive. But I did have to ask them, how do you guys live here? How do you actually stand the idea that when you swim in your pool in the basement, anywhere between 11 and 19 young men were murdered here?
God.
And being in the woods, I was in the spot in the woods where Herb Baumeister disposed of the bodies. I was there several times. It really brings home to you that these were real people. And what bugs me most about that case is that so many of them are still out there. They found over 5,000 bone fragments and parts of human bodies.
Oh, my God.
They still turn up to this day. Baumeister allowed the bodies to decompose rather than buried them. He burned some, he mulched some. The police, when they finally came onto the property and they uncovered what he did, found skulls and bones and bone fragments littered throughout the woods behind the farm. So none of those poor boys got a Christian burial, and parts of them are still out there and always will be. And I just find that breaks my heart, Chris. It really does.
Well, I hope when you go out there, or someone goes out there, they do prayers for the dead, for those souls, and that was done, hopefully.
Yes, but repeatedly.
Yeah, no, that's great. Now, your book on the serial killers, you cover a lot of different serial killers and homicidal maniacs like John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, obviously Jeffrey Dahmer, but even some of the lesser known and overlooked murderers like you've been discussing, Herbert Baumeister, what is this, America's I-70 Strangler?
Yeah.
Japan's anime killer, and just Russia's Ripper, and just all these other ones. So it seems other countries have had their own versions of these psychotic, crazy killers as well.
And it's not a uniquely American phenomenon. And the truth is, Chris, when you write a book like this that's a general look at serial killers, any publisher will tell you have to cover the well-known ones. People have a certain expectation that you'll talk about, Bundy, Gacy, and Dahmer. But I wanted to cast a wider net and look at some of these other countries, like Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper in Russia. Many people here in the States have not heard of this guy. It's kind of interesting. The man was a teacher, of all things.
Wow.
Yeah. Or you look at Nanny Doss, who was American, was a female. She started killing her husbands and then her own grandchild as soon as it was born. All of that began after she was on a train and sustained a head injury when the train stopped too abruptly. The anime killer in Japan, and I have a very hard time pronouncing his name. I apologize, and I won't butcher it. But the disturbing thing about him was that he targeted children. And once he had killed the children, he would phone the families of the children and taunt them.
It's terrible.
Just absolutely, absolutely vile. And so I wanted to look a little broader than here in the States and Great Britain, and look at Europe and look at Asia and the Far East, places like that. And the truth is, I cover something like 40 of them in this book, Chris, and I barely scratched the surface. You could write 10 books like this, because this is a phenomenon that crosses all cultural boundaries as far as we're aware. You see it throughout the world. The further back in human history we go, it's interesting to see that this phenomenon was more accepted then, because rather than having to, cloak oneself, you could murder many, many people and kind of be legitimate about it if you did it the right way. I look at Burke and Hare, the Resurrection Men from Scotland. I'm sure you're familiar with them. They were the men that dug up bodies for the anatomists to dissect in medical school, and great money. And when they ran out of dead bodies because people were putting like iron cages over graves to protect themselves, Burke and Hare they developed a technique called burking, which involved putting pressure on the chest and asphyxiating the person. They started killing people to get more money for these fresh victims.
Oh my God, that's horrible.
Yeah. So it's a phenomenon that goes way back, and I often wonder if we see some of these Amazonian rainforest tribes and things like that. Do we have the same kind of thing there? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anthropologists would be better suited to answer that question.
Well, it brings up, too, you talk about organ donating and then how the black market with organs, with people, being killed or kidnapped and organs being taken. Some were rumors, but then some were actual fact of that happening. It's where people just get to a point, like you said earlier, where they're just depersonalized with other human beings and they just treat them as a commodity or as a victim.
I think a lack of empathy is at the heart of it. Yeah. And I think a lack of empathy is at the heart of so many of our world's troubles right now.
Right. Oh, and it's horrific that we see something like that. And it's like, what do we do? How do we correct that? I don't know. I don't have the answer.
I don't either. And the only way that I can tackle anything like that personally is you try and do what good you can in your own small circle of influence. I learned and I teach triage, which is a paramedic skill where you are dealing with a large number of patients. So let's say you have a mass casualty event and it's overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming. So you have a railroad crash or a bus crash or something of that nature. How do you even start to deal with this and not get overwhelmed? And the first principle is you start where you stand. You start doing what good you can for the person in front of you. And it may be very little, and you may have to move on very quickly. Or you may be able to open an airway and stop some bleeding and then move on. But you do what good you can for the person in front of you, and then you move on, and you move on, and you move on. And that's really the only way I can see that we can live our lives and not be overwhelmed by this big sea of negativity that surrounds us. Triage. Yeah.
Well said. You talk also about the Boston Strangler. And there's mention whether Albert DeSalvo was really the Boston Strangler. I mean, what do you think?
I think it was interesting that they did DNA testing. I find it credible. I think DeSalvo was the Boston Strangler. But, I mean, he was trying to make money on his story, was trying to score a film and a book deal. So there was enough shadiness to it. But there was, I think, some reasonable doubt. Did he have an accomplice? Was it somebody else? It's possible. It really is possible. Whenever there's a financial motivation, and you have to look at motivations, don't you?
Right.
Dennis Nielsen, for example, killed for company. He killed because he was lonely. He was the British guy that used to kill these young men and used to lay in bed with their corpses on top of him and watch TV.
Oh,
he killed because he was lonely.
So is that where Rob Zombie got some of that stuff for some of his movies? I mean, there's a scene in one of the movies. What's it called? The Devil Rejects. I stopped watching. I couldn't watch it after I saw some of the scenes. But I know there was one scene where the guy is laying there with a dead body on top of him and the police show up and he throws the body off him. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And I guess that must be based on what you were just saying.
Maybe. I mean, Nielsen used to bury them under the floorboards and then bring them back up when he was lonely and sit them in a chair and have tea with them and then sleep on top of them, put them in the bath. He would
That's crazy.
But again, it's this ability to depersonalize. Nobody in their right mind is going to do that to a corpse. But if you are wired in that way where you depersonalize them, then, to him, that made sense.
Yeah, it's got me thinking, and I really don't want to go into this tangent, but I'm going to mention I've seen where people talked about, and I've actually seen some of the photographs where they talk about these dolls, love dolls or whatever they are, where they look so freaking real. And there's some guy married one, and some guy's got one he's talking about. He's got a couple of them in his living room. I'm just sitting there going, but there's no soul, there's no personality, there's no it's like that's a form of depersonalizing as well. You're looking at it as just an object, but you're trying to have an intimate relationship. To me, it's really creepy. It's really crazy. But it's similar to what you were just saying about the one killer that had the dead corpses.
But take that a step further, Chris, because technology advances. Are you familiar with the Turing test?
The what? No, I'm not.
So Alan Turing, you might have heard of. He was the great code breaker at Bletchley Park during the Second World War. Benedict Cumberbatch played him in the movie The Imitation Game. He was this genius, code-breaking genius mathematician.
With the big machine?
Exactly.
Yes, the Enigma machine or something?
The Enigma was the machine whose codes he broke. The machines he used were called bombs, B-O-M-B.
Great movie.
Great story if you get a chance to read the history.
Yep.
But Turing always talked about artificial intelligence. Will computers one day arise to the point where they have a personality? And the Turing test is that if you were to sit right now, Chris, at a keyboard, okay, and you would have a chat window, and you would have a conversation with me on the other end of the chat window. Hey, Chris, how's it going? Good, Richard. How are you? Great, thanks. Good day, bad day, all that kind of stuff. The Turing test says that if you could converse with someone in a chat window and not know that they were a machine, that they could fool you, then that met Turing's criteria for something being sufficiently advanced to have intelligence, true intelligence. And now they are building artificial intelligence networks, which are getting sharper and sharper and sharper. One day in the not too distant future, those dolls will have algorithms which know what your favorite music is, and can converse with you and ask you about your day, and they will learn. They will learn, Chris really loves Star Wars, or this, that, and the other. They'll be able to respond to cues. At what point is that line so blurred that this depersonalized thing, you can no longer tell the difference, and you can form a relationship? Because those days are coming.
What you're saying is, I just want to say something that's kind of funny, is I have Echoes and Alexas all over my house. And I'll say, Alexa, what time is it, right? I'll ask, what's the temperature outside?
Alexa, add all of Richard Estep's books to my shopping cart.
Stop. Right. That's hilarious.
Sorry.
But I have it, and I remember when I first got it, I was on the phone with my mom, and I'll be like, Alexa, stop playing the music. My mom's like, who are you talking to? I said, I'm talking to my girlfriend, Mom. And she's like, what? Her name's Alexa? I go, yeah. I said, yeah, she does whatever I tell her to. And it was a joke. But it's like we're getting to this point of depersonalization, especially with this COVID thing, which is crazy, is that people, and even people that are lonely, they need that companionship. If they don't have a pet or they don't have somebody there, eventually there's going to be some artificial intelligence that they can exist with, coexist.
And let's look at the upside. I mean, one of the things that COVID has highlighted, but is you want to talk about an epidemic, is old people who are lonely, senior citizens who have nobody. That has been so exacerbated by COVID. But even before that, you look at all of these poor souls that they don't have family, they're not in contact with anyone. Some kind of AI that could keep them could be immensely beneficial for their mental health. Hugely. So again, like anything else, double-edged sword.
Well, no, you're right. And I remember when I got my concussion and I was dealing with a mild traumatic brain injury, is the one thing is living alone was difficult, that I didn't have the stimulation, the interaction. So I bought Amazon Alexa to use certain apps to do puzzles verbally, where I would talk to Alexa, it would talk back, I would ask it would ask me questions, and I would respond. And that was just to stimulate the brain, to educate and keep it going, because the brain's neuroplastic. But I reflect back, because you said something, is I remember my grandma's best friend. He was a neighbor across the street. He was like my uncle, but he wasn't my uncle. His name was Johnny. And when I used to stay in Canada, we played baseball, we played cards. He was amazing. I remember after my grandma died and his sister died, he went and lived in an apartment by himself. And when I came up to go to my grandma's funeral, I had called him to see how he's doing, and he was just emotional. He says, I'm so lonely. Please come see me. Well, my dad didn't really care for him too much. My dad would not take me over there to see him, and I wanted to see him so bad. And I will never forget just his plea that he was just so lonely. And here he was, he's like 70-something years old. And there are people like that over the world. And that's where artificial intelligence would be beneficial for them, because it would give them some form of companionship if there's not somebody there.
Absolutely. And somebody to help monitor their needs and call for help if needed and so forth. So, the digital age can be a very good thing in some ways and a terrible thing in others.
Well, terrible thing in others, because eventually we could have Skynet, and we could have Terminators, and we have serial killers that are artificial intelligence. So look at the military. As you've seen the videos with them, with the soldiers going around, where eventually they're going to have these computerized soldiers to go on the battlefield. Well, what happens if one of them goes rogue? And one of them, and we're talking about sci-fi movies, but technology today, eventually that's going to become a reality. And then we may have some type of serial killer type robot.
I might just steal that idea for a novel.
There you go. There you go, my friend. I want the residuals.
We'll have your people talk to my people.
There you go. Now, Richard, last question regarding serial killers. is it possible that you could know a serial killer?
Well, I mean, highly unlikely you do, Chris, because what are the odds there would be two of us on the same side? In all seriousness, though, right. Yeah, because it's not that uncommon a phenomenon. It's certainly not as uncommon as we used to think. And I do suspect that part of the reason that they're proliferating is that we glorify them as a society. You know, not to pick on Netflix, because you can look on Amazon Prime or any streaming platform, and people are fascinated with serial killer documentaries. The books like mine, which, you know, there's no there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of those books out there. We have a fascination with them, and to a degree I think we make them rock stars as a society. You know, they get more column inches. I'm a big believer that when we have a spree killing, I really wish that the shooter's name, for example, would never be published, and that we just choose to honor and remember the memories of the victims.
Good point.
Fame is the air supply that many of them crave, and we should cut that off. I think that would be hugely beneficial.
That's a great idea. Do you remember the Brown's Chicken Massacre back in '93?
I do not.
It was a mass murder that happened at the fast food restaurant Brown's Chicken back in 1993. And two of the murderers actually went to my high school. But they weren't identified till about 9 years later as the suspects. The weird thing is I had driven by there that night on Northwest Highway, and I glanced and looked over at the Brown's Chicken, saying I just had a weird feeling. And I remember looking at one of the cars that was on the side of the building, and I just continued home. And then I found out the next day that this murder happened. And it was a mystery because they didn't know who did it, because they didn't have cameras all set up back then. And it was just this long, ongoing investigation. Do you know how they caught him?
I do not know.
Well, it wasn't the police. The story is, I guess, that the two guys that actually did this were at someone's house, and it was his girlfriend's house, and he had brought something up in a conversation. You know, it's 9 years later. He's feeling cocky. They're never going to get caught. And he says something, and the next day, his girlfriend goes to the police and turns him in. And they were just in high school. They were high schoolers. They were two high schoolers that did this.
It's complacency and ego that gets many of them caught, though. I mean, you're familiar with Dennis Rader, the BTK, the bind, torture, kill murderer. If you're not, this guy, particularly chilling because he seemed to be a devoted family man, was very active in his local community church, but would break into homes, bind, gag, torture, and then murder men, women, and children, families. Horrible individual. He enjoyed taunting the police, as so many of them do. So here comes that ego and gratification again. The way he was caught was that he would leave notes for the police in library books and then phone, through things like that. And he was corresponding with the police through advertisements, classified ads. And he actually said to the cops in an ad, if I were to send you a floppy disk, I'm sorry about laughing at this, but it is funny. If I were to send you a floppy disk, would you ever be able to trace it back to me? And the police said, no. Unbelievable. Must have been rubbing their hands together and going, no, absolutely not. This was done with it. So he sent them a floppy disk, which, if you know anything about computers, this was the old school floppy disk. It had written on it fragmentary data from this particular church. He used the computer, printer, and all that stuff at church, and had believed the cops when they said. So if the guy had just kept his mouth shut, had not taunted the police, would have gotten away with it. And the truly scary ones, I hate to use the word successful. By successful, I purely mean don't get caught. The truly successful ones are the ones that are able to not boast and brag and speak about it.
Right.
Those are the ones to truly fear.
There's always been, I don't want to say there's a curiosity towards serial killers. There's been a fear I've had towards serial killers. And namely, it's because what possesses them to do that? Like I'm not afraid of ghosts, spirits, negative stuff like that. I'm afraid of people. That someone can can do that to another human being and just be taken over, whether it's their own mental state or it's something else affecting their mental state. After I'd done Dead Famous, the TV show Dead Famous, the same production company and the producer, Charlotte, came up with the concept to do Dead Infamous. Dead Infamous became Conversations with the Serial Killer. And I was supposed to co-host and present this show called Conversations with the Serial Killer, which had, I think, 6 or 8, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and so on. Ed Gein.
Who wasn't a serial killer, believe it or not.
Oh, I didn't know that. But I think during the show that was just an individual they wanted to have us focus on, that had killed people. And I turned it down 3 weeks before production for us to start filming. Because I just started having nightmares. Because here I was, they wanted me to channel some of these serial killers. I was going to communicate with them. And I felt that either they were going to attach to me or I was going to get stuff in my head that I just don't want in my head from their perspective. So I canceled it. They were furious and they had to stop production and quickly get someone else to take my place. And they did. They ended up shooting it. And the guy that replaced me, he did a wonderful job. But for me personally and mentally, I just didn't think at that time in my life, because I was going through a relationship issue at the time, that I could fathom those types of murders and situations to connect with as a medium, that I thought it would just drive me crazy. Picking up the emotions and trying to see what they saw, why they killed, getting inside their head, like this mind hunter, and trying to figure out what their whole purpose of doing it was. I just thought it would drive me nuts.
What is it that Nietzsche said? You gaze into the abyss gazes into you. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and as far as Gacy goes, I was fascinated at the idea that he would be haunting this movie theater in Illinois. Mm-hmm. And the whole story behind that intrigued me. And I brought in a couple of mediums, and one of them said that whenever she saw Gacy, he was shackled at the legs and was almost serving out some kind of, I don't want to say penance, but it was as if he was currently had a spiritual... Well, yeah, but also almost had a spiritual jailer that appeared with him at all times, that was taller, that was brighter, that kind of shot, like a decent spirit, that made sure he could no longer do any mischief.
Wow.
Kind of fascinating concept. Have you ever encountered situations like that in your time?
Well, years ago when Gacy had finally been put to death, and I had done a Ouija board session, and we communicated with him, and he said that he was in this darkness and just wanted to be left alone. He says, I just want to be alone. He says, like he was in his own private hell. There wasn't demons around him and flames. It was just, he was in this lapsed darkness where he just sat there coming to terms with what he had done. And there was a depressive state like that I had done this, but also he was kind of in his own private cell of darkness. And I was like, well, this is kind of boring. I was thinking he could tell us more about what's going on, but little did I know about the psychological thing that spirits go through when they come to terms that they absorb every emotion of what they've done and traumatized to others, and that can become their own little private hell. And they have to sit there and absorb that and realize from every perspective of person they came in contact with what they had done. They feel all of that.
That would make complete sense. That would be hellish. But that being said, surely that's the first step on their road to progression, to spiritual progression and climbing out of it, correct? There's no such thing as a free lunch. I know that was Heinlein's rule, but it's a spiritual law.
Right.
So it kind of fascinates me, this idea, because I've been told, and again, you're the man to ask, but by a number of mediums, that when we die, we don't instantly become angelic. We don't become omniscient. We don't know everything or anything like that.
Correct.
We are still working through the same issues. So if I'm angry now, I'll be an angry guy after death, and I have to work through that, and I have to progress through it. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's true. We can carry our emotions, our feelings, our attachments, our mindset into the afterlife as a spirit. The goal is to try to correct those things before we die and go to the other side. We don't always get that chance, but look at Daniel Brinkley, who wrote the book Saved by the Light, okay? He was kind of a bully, and he didn't care about other people. He was very selfish. He would kick his dog, this and that. He dies, gets hit by lightning, goes to the other side, sees these spiritual beings. He didn't see angels, didn't see God, but he saw these spiritual beings. And they show him his life. They show what the dog felt, that the dog just was hungry, that this guy that went into his family store and stole, and he followed him and beat him up, his family, this guy that was stealing from them, was trying to support his family to put food on the table. So when Danyan saw this, like, oh my God, I'm seeing what's really going on in their life, and it's not so bad, and I'm being bad to them because I'm not compassionate or showing empathy to their situation. He realized he had to change his perspective of other people, that it wasn't other people that were wrong, it was him. So he came back and became a very passionate, compassionate person towards others. Well, a serial killer that goes and does this and has depersonalized themselves from other people now realizes that they have a personality, a soul, emotions, and look at the fear and the emotion you created by killing them, as well as their entire family and friends that knew them. You have to experience all of that. That can be overwhelming for a soul. So what I'm saying in a nutshell is that a serial killer or a murderer or someone that kills somebody, when they die, they're going to experience the victim. They're going to experience the fear and everything the victim went through, as well as all the people attached to that victim, the family members, loved ones, people that knew them. They're all going to be hurt by that murder. That
makes complete sense to me. And it's hard to even think of the possibility of redemption for somebody that heinous, isn't it? The sheer evil that misery they've inflicted on others and the families and people of that nature. But is any spirit truly beyond redemption, Chris? Do you see, or is it just a long climb for some?
I don't know if I can fully answer that. All that I know is that from communicating with spirits, as well as some spirits that have been stuck here, or some spirits that have crossed over, is forgiveness is key. They got to forgive themselves, and they have to be forgiven. But no matter what someone has done, I do believe they can still cross over and be forgiven, go into the light. You know, in some of our seances that we've done, or when I've dealt with someone that's possessed or has an attachment, and that entity's come forward, no matter how evil or demonic, that entity can forgive itself. If it's woken up and it's consulted in a way that it realizes what it's done, it doesn't have to do that, such as addressing its own pain that's causing it to do that, its anger. Addressing that and realizing that it's misplaced, changes can occur. And if it forgives itself, then it's on the recovery to being forgiven. And it's that simple, because everything here is an experience, whether it's good or bad. Doesn't mean that it's right, because we have the choice to determine what is right, is that everyone can go back to the source, to the creator. And it's just a stepping process in identifying what you accept and what you don't accept. If you are a serial killer and you've done all this and you say, oh my God, look what I've done to these people. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I'm sorry for what I've done. Will you forgive me? And if forgiveness is given and received, then I do believe that spirit can go back to the source, to the creator. So
I'd imagine that with some souls, it takes more work than it does with others.
Oh, absolutely. Some can't go right away. You know, they have to be reconditioned. And some don't believe that they can be reconditioned. So it's all the free will. So tell me, I mean, you've written so many other books, and we're at the end here of Spirit Talk. You've got two websites I want to tell everybody about, which is richardestep.net. And people can go there, learn more about you, find out more about your books. But then you've also got your ghost group that you have, bouldercountyparanormal.org.
And by far, bouldercountyparanormal.org is less active, simply because I've tended to become more of a writer and less of an investigator. My passion is telling stories, just like them to be true. So you're more likely now in a haunted location. I was recently at Beatty Mansion in Missouri, for example. And talk about a synchronicity, by the way. I took a sidestep down the hill, and we were in Jesse James's house on the 139th anniversary of his murder. Just happened to be there on the day, standing in the spot where he was tilting a crooked picture frame when he was shot by the coward Robert Ford. So in cases like that, I'm always looking at the story and how I can frame that and share that with readers. So my author page is a little bit more active. I tend to work with investigators I trust and respect. Mm-hmm. One of the dangers of being my friend, which will probably befall you someday, Chris, is that there's a real danger of you ending up as a real character in one of my books.
Just as long as I'm not a serial
No,
killer.
I don't think so. I don't think so. So yeah,
I'll be the detective in the fight and the vigilante that goes after the serial killer.
We got Greg Lawson for that, and a big shout out to
There
Greg.
you go.
The psychic paranormal detective, right? But
so how many books have you written? Like 14, 15?
no, I'm at 25, 26 right now.
Holy
I have several in stages of development. The same company that I wrote Serial Killers for said, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, something less murdery. So I'm writing a book about U.S. military history for them, which has been quite a change of focus. But yeah, 24, 25, something like that at the moment is where I'm at, with more in the books.
I said this earlier before we started this interview, that you are the Willy Wonka of paranormal books. People are like, well, what does he mean by that? Well, Willy Wonka had all these different candies and everything like that. And he had a factory where he's cranking it out, and that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm at my happiest writing. I like stories. I like sharing stories. And life's an adventure if you're doing it right, isn't it? So, and it's an adventure I like to share. And just my medium is print. I do TV shows. I just did Paranormal Night Shift is my latest show, and I do enjoy that. But as my wife likes to point out, I have a great camera for a book, a great face for a book. I look a lot better in words than I do, action.
Oh, God bless her. God bless her. Well, listen, I want to thank you very much for doing this interview. I know it was short notice and everything. And where can everybody get your books?
You can get them at all the usual places. Amazon, of course, seems to be the big source for everything, but you can also catch my stuff in America at your latest Barnes & Noble, places like that, all good bookstores. Or I like to sell personalized signed books, which I advertise through my website and through my Facebook page, Richard Estep Author.
Excellent. Everybody listening, I will have the links to these pages where you can access this and check out more of his books. And I do want to state quickly, I met Richard for the first time a couple years ago at Sage Paracon in the UK. And his table was right across from me. He's one of the most friendliest people that I've known. We've become friends since then. And maybe in the future we'll write a book together.
That's a great idea, man. That's a great idea.
I would actually love to. So I want to thank you so much, Richard. Anything else you want to say to the listeners?
I just would like to say thank you for listening. Chris, thank you for this opportunity. And be kind. That's the one thing we all need to be reminded of, right? Life is hard for everybody right now. Be as kind as you can to as many people as you can.
Absolutely. For our listeners, you can check out Richard's websites at richardestep.net. That's ESTEP.net. And also bouldercountyparanormal.org. Now, Richard, like he said, has over 20 books that he's published. You can go to his website and you can check out some of those titles, as well as go to Amazon.com. You can find them on there and you can purchase any of the books. I'll put the links up on the Planet Paranormal page. And then check out the shows that Richard's been on using his expertise to talk about the case as well as the locations, such as Haunted Case Files, which is called Paranormal Investigators in the UK, Haunted Hospitals, and Paranormal 911. Well, that's it, everybody. You've been listening to Richard Estep, my guest, and myself, Chris Fleming, on this month's edition of Spirit Talk. I will see you, as always, sometime next month.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you for listening.